So the second lesson we are going to do today is 0.3
Really?
operations with integers.
They left this in the library.
Nice. I'll read it to you now. So 0.3 operations with integers. The first one we are going to do, we're going to add integers on a number line. Okay, so the first thing you need to do is draw yourself a number line. So I start with 0. Positive numbers, do they go to the right or to the left? To the right. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Negative numbers are going to go to the left. -1, -2, -3, -4, -5, -6, -7. So it says use the number line to find -3 plus a -4. So where am I starting at? I'm going to start at -3. That is my starting point, was -3. And then plus a -4. So I'm going to add 4, but what direction am I going to go in? To the right or to the left?
To the right.
To the right. Okay, so if I added a positive number, yes, I would go to the right. But when you add a negative number, you are going to go to the left. Okay, yep, that direction. So when you go to the left, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, you end up at -7. So -3 plus a -4 is equal to -7. And it's equal to -7. Now we're going to start talking about what happens when you have same signs and different signs. So when you have a positive number like 3 plus a positive number 5, you will always get a positive number. So the sum of two positive numbers is always positive. So in this, I'm going to put sum is positive. When you take a positive number plus a positive number, you will always get a positive number. Now what happens if I take a negative number, like -3, plus a negative number like -5? Will my answer be positive or negative? Negative. So it'll be -8. So the sum of two negative numbers is always what?
Negative.
Always negative. Now, before we move on and talk about signs that are being different, we needed to define an absolute value. Anybody know what absolute value is? Absolute value of a number line, or of a number, the absolute value of a number is its distance from 0 on a number line. So what this means is when you take the absolute value of any number, it will always be positive. Because we're talking about distance. Can distance ever be negative? So if Brian goes out and he tries to run, he runs backwards for 1 mile. Is that a negative mile? No, he's still covered a mile of ground. Okay? Distance can never be negative. So when you take the absolute value, you're taking the absolute value of that number. So what is the absolute value of 3? 3. Because the distance from 0 to 3 is 3. What's the absolute value of -5?
5.
5, because the distance from 0 to -5 is 5. All right? Does that make sense on absolute value? So when I take a positive number like 3 plus a negative number such as -5, I will get a negative number if the negative number has a greater absolute value. So what we are going to write is negative 5 has greater absolute value. So because negative 5 has a greater absolute value, the sum, sorry, I'm lagging a little bit, the sum is negative. So since I know that negative 5 is greater, the sum is negative. So 3 plus a negative 5 is negative 2. It is negative 2. Now the last one, we're going to have negative 3 plus 5. What does that equal to? 2. And we know it's a positive because of why?
Positive numbers has a higher absolute value.
Yeah, the bigger number, the 5 has a greater absolute value. So 5 has a greater absolute value. So the sum is what? The sum is positive. Now, I told you guys that you guys can use calculators on your homework. You guys can use calculators when we take our test. So you'll be able to just plug these into a calculator, but you need to know what happens when you have positive and negative numbers. So those are the rules with positive and negative numbers. So let's take a look at example 2. So example 2, if you use the absolute value method, which I'm going to show you, but I'm not going to require you to do. So what they ask you to do when they say use the absolute value method is they want you to take the absolute value of both and tell me what the answer is going to be. So I have a negative number plus a negative number. Negative 11 plus negative 7. So my answer, is it going to be positive or negative? Negative. So my final answer is going to be negative. And then we're going to take the absolute value of negative 11 plus the absolute value of negative 7, and we're going to simplify it. What is the absolute value of negative 11? 11. So I have negative parentheses 11 plus, what's the absolute value of negative 7? 7. I wish it would quit lagging. What is 11 plus 7? 18. So my answer is negative 18. Now, since you guys are going to have access to a calculator, you can just plug it in, okay? And show me what calculator you guys are using, and I will make sure that you know how to plug it in correctly, okay? The TI 83 calculators, you put the negative sign in first, okay? But there are some calculators where you have to put it in second, all right? But I can help explain that once we get there. So let's go ahead and talk about example 3. What is the answer? First, before you give me an answer, tell me, is this positive or negative?
Negative.
Negative. Because the absolute value is greater on which one? 18 or negative 23? Negative 23, right? So 18 minus 23 is negative 5. And again, on something as simple as that, you're going to have a calculator. I don't expect you to use that absolute value method. All right? So let's flip it over to the back. So now we're going to talk about signs when we're talking about multiplication. So when we're talking about multiplication, if I take a positive number times a positive number, I get a positive answer. So if I take 3 times 5, I get an answer of 15. All right? So positive times, and that little dot in between means times. Positive times a positive is a positive. Anytime you have a positive times a positive, we'll always have a positive. What happens if I take a negative, like -3 times a -5? Negative times a negative is
Positive.
a positive. So I still get a positive 15. So a negative times a negative is a what? Is a positive. So when your signs are the same, we are always going to get a positive. Positive times a positive is a positive. Negative times a negative is a positive. So now we're going to take a look at what happens when your signs are different. So we're going to take a positive 3 times a -5. Positive 3 times -5 is -15, right? What happens if I flip it? What happens if I make it -3 times a positive 5? What is it? -15. So no matter what order they are in, okay, no matter what order they are in, anytime you take a positive times a negative or a negative times a positive, the answer always is what? Is always negative. Does everybody remember this from last year? So just by looking at it before you type it into your calculator, you should be able to tell me whether the answer should be positive or negative. Okay? So when we move down here and we take a look at example 4a, before you tell me what the answer is, I want to know positive or negative.
Negative.
Negative. Negative what?
20.
Negative 20. 4 times -5 will give you -20.
Just divide.
-51 divided by -3.
Positive.
Positive.
Positive. Positive what? Does anybody know?
17.
17. And everybody notice how I'm circling all my answers? I expect you to circle all your answers on your homework. Okay, C. -12 times -14. Positive or negative? Positive. Answer is
168.
168. And then finally, our last one, -63 divided by 7. Positive or negative?
Negative.
Negative. And my answer is
9.
9.